Welcome to episode 58 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kellerin. Today we have a very special return guest. He's the professor of chemistry, organic chemistry at Cornell, and is one of the most entertaining follows on Twitter, if you don't follow him already, but is also a very fun follow on financial markets and a variety of rabbit holes. And his year in review that he puts out every year is a must read. So, Dave, thanks for coming back.
My pleasure. You are doing very well for yourself for a young punk with a relatively new podcast. The year in review, by the way, let me tell an entertaining story. Bob Moriarty of Gold Fame is actually now, with the help of an editor for which Bob is paying the tab, is binding from 2009 to the present. He's making an anthology of them. So we've done 2012 to 13, I think 14, 15 are nearly done, 22 to 24 are done. So they seem determined to put every guy. So I'll have like an encyclopedia of year in review. So
it's going to be the Dave Collum.
You should. I'm not saying you should buy it. I'm just saying that it's going to be out there. It's for me as posterity. It'll be a wad of shit at Amazon.
Going to be the Dave Collum Encyclopedia Britannica version of the last couple
or whatever it is, yeah, right.
of the last couple decades, yeah. But I think one of the things we were talking about briefly before we fired it up was the.
There you go.
I know. We were just talking about this, but anyway, I figured I get one free pass, but
now you can do it.
But basically, we were talking about some of the stuff going on in financial markets. I think that'd be a good place to start because there's a lot of people that are getting bullish and excited about equities or all these different things, and the bond markets are in an interesting spot. I think inflation is probably coming back, and you have all these different things that are basically telling you the government's looking to run it hot, and like the cutting deficits, like debt to GDP, all these different things. Looks like that's going to be a snowball's chance in hell. So what are you kind of seeing big picture as far as financial markets, debt markets, commodities, wherever you want to take it?
Well, I'm the biggest bear on Twitter. You would be hard pressed to find someone who's more bearish than me. And I've been. I had 3 really good decades, and the team sucked. But I'm back in the saddle. I'm up something like 23% year to date on risk assets. So that doesn't include the fixed income, which, depending on what they are risk assets in my opinion. But So again, my pitch, I think the valuations are ridiculous. I think that it is a time bomb waiting to go off. No one knows when. People always say, well, valuation don't allow you to time the market. I agree. That's been proven beyond it. If anyone doubts that, they're out of their minds, right? You really are a sick bastard. But they do tell you how much your ass is going to get blown up if you're caught off guard. And so I am convinced that when valuations get to these levels, you should simply find high ground. I don't recommend, twice I've shorted the market and twice made about 30%. They weren't big positions. They were kind of market neutralizing positions in funds, but it was enough that in 99 to 2002 and 2006-ish to 2009, to knock out some of the pain that I had when I had a lot of things that were good investments, but still got dragged down with the downdraft a little bit. So I did really well until about 13, and then the commodity cycle turned against me, and I lost some. And curiously, Cornell saved me a ton of money by booting me out. They said your assets I had a bunch of energy-based assets. They kicked me out of them and said that Cornell's deemed them to be too risky, and so we don't offer those anymore. They gave me life cycle funds. I said, screw that, and figured another way to do it. So I have us 200% over historical average valuation, and I believe that means that we're guaranteed to have some wretched investing going forward. Throw on top of that fourth turning arguments, which I think are getting pretty good. throw on that the wild volatility in the markets, right? I mean, the markets are like a teenager driving on black ice, right? I mean, it's just they're just whipping back and forth, and that's eventually, you know what happens? It wraps itself around a tree, and but I also am not a believer in crashes being corrective. I don't think crashes correct anything. The dip buyers show up too fast, and they'll bring it back pretty close to where it was. History shows that over and over and over that crashes don't do squat. I believe that these markets will get back to cheap at some point in the future, and it's going to do it by rotting and ripping your soul. And I think it's going to be a relentless beatings where you think you're in the clear and then you get beaten up again. And so that's how you correct markets. And someone who thinks that if a market goes down and then comes back 2 years later, you've corrected something, though, that person needs professional help. So
yeah, I think the buy the dip mentality is definitely ingrained in a lot of investors.
40 years.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other thing too, with some of the other market dynamics that other people have talked about, like the passive flows and like pod shops,
like Greenland.
Yeah. But like all these different things that are not like fundamental investing, like based on like what a company is actually worth, like how do we allocate capital to individual opportunities, whether it's debt or equity. I think we're going back to that. I don't know when, but I think that'd be a good thing for the health of markets in general. But I think what I like to lump it in and call it basically like fake and gay investing, where you have passive and pod shops and all these different like volatility as an asset. The fact that like people trade derivatives
vol
like
should not be traded. I don't need my gamma squeezed either, right?
it's just so many different things where it's like the fact that we are in this state of hyper financialization, I think spells trouble for a lot of different things. But I think at the same time, when you have like valuations like you kind of talked about, all these different aspects of what's going on in markets, I think bubbles create anti-bubbles, and that's what I see in general in commodities. I know you've been a big holder of gold for a long time, but I think that may be a good place to start on commodities in general. You can go from there.
Well, the metals have been an interesting story. So I've held gold since '99. It's about 30% of my total worth at this point. Silver, another handful of percent. There's all sorts of angles here. One is that maybe it's blowing off some top. You know, it's not a language I typically use. So there is the crowd who thinks that we're going to do all sorts of repricing of the gold, which no one has ever said anything that makes sense to me. I don't understand even what they're saying. So they'll say, well, they're gonna reprice gold. And I go, how do you do that? You go, well, you price the gold and the three major storages at $3,300 an ounce. I go, okay, so now you have 85 tons of gold at $3,300 an ounce. You know, what does that matter? I don't understand. What does that get you? I don't understand.
Well, I think the argument is just collateral to borrow against, which kind of takes you back to the starting point of like the debt issue, right? Well,
so the collateral, I don't even know. I don't see evidence we need that. I mean, if people don't like 30-year treasuries, they're not going to buy them, right? I mean, if someone doesn't like 30-year treasuries, they're not going to buy it. And the fact that you're 8,500 tons of gold in Fort Knox, even if someone else owns it, it somehow lets you borrow. I mean, well, let's just make a platinum coin, Krugman style, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it at all. There's a story about it being a tier one asset now, which could produce a demand, right? Because other countries do need the collateral. We seem to just be able to print. So I don't argue that. I think those are stories that sound good as long as you don't think too hard. And then when you start thinking about it, you go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And so I have not yet heard that story made in a coherent way. I've not been able. I was on Andy Schechtman, and I kind of pushed back hard on a couple of these. And he seemed kind of openly rattled about my rhetorical questions. And so I think that's bullshit. I think the silver gold ratio, is interesting, but I'm not sure there's any reason why there has to be a fixed ratio. I think one could make the argument. I guess one of the reasons would be silver we tend to consume and gold we don't. And the people say, "Oh, gold's useful for things." I go, oh, bullshit, right? I mean, you could, 150,000 tons of gold has been mined since the dawn of time. How much has that been used, right? You only put so many space shuttles up there and stuff like that. So I don't think so. It wouldn't take much to satisfy the entire industrial demand of gold for 500 years. And so I don't know why silver and gold ratio, which is at record levels. So to the extent that you believe that, you're betting on the wisdom of crowds, or you're guessing what the other guessers are guessing, as Fleckenstein would say. It might be that thing's gonna do an arbitrage, but I don't know which price is gonna narrow the gap. But I don't think it's a terrible bet. If I had no metals and no exposure, I'd buy silver, not gold. How's that?
Yeah.
Because one seems to be doing really well, which is scary, and the other one seems to have been somewhat left behind, which is better. I have been a platinum bug without a big commitment for a couple of years now, and in part because it's dead. I mean, it's really dead. It's the blood in the streets dried up and blew away dead, and blood in the streets over the last 40 years has been a good buying opportunity. In history, blood in the streets meant everyone died. There was just blood. And so I think it's really when when the equity investors are playing solitaire at their desk, that's when you want to buy equities, and they're considered psychotic. And meanwhile, platinum is at that phase, right? So I think the death of the internal combustion engine has been declared incorrectly, is my guess. The hybrid looks like a good technology to me. It looks like the optimum as opposed to fully electric, which I guess we'll get to fully electric, but I don't think the whole world's going to go there. I think most people want some of the gas in that tank, and the hybrid use more platinum than the internal combustion engines. So that could be good news. The providers of platinum are Russia and South Africa. One we're trying to destroy, and the other was trying to destroy itself. So I got to figure, if South Africa nationalizes its mines after killing every white guy in the country, it seems unlikely that they'll be a great provider of platinum, because socialists, once they commandeer the machinery of capitalism, don't know how to produce wealth. And so they're likely to blow it pretty badly. Russia, they'll keep producing, and it's fungible. So, we'll sell it to someone who will sell it to us, and we'll find a way to get what we need from them. What do you think? Pick on one of those.
I think on platinum, I can't remember where I was reading this, but I think the deficits, like annual deficits, are like something to the tune of like 1 million ounces a year, and the above ground stockpiles were like 2 or 3 million ounces. I'm not
really.
I think basically at the current rate, within a couple of years, there's going to be a supply squeeze when you look at the cost to mine, where it's basically below the cost curve, and like we're basically consuming above ground supply like pretty quickly. I'd have to go back and look. Those are, I think, right in the right ballpark, but listeners, don't quote me on it. But I don't
remember the numbers, but for some reason that's just intuitively shocking me a little bit. But you're better at this stuff than me. You're way better at this stuff than me. So that would be wildly bullish.
Yeah.
Well, if I get off this podcast and you're not full of shit, I'm fine. As we said before the podcast started, right? The age-old line. As we said before the podcast started, I have an email in my email box to buy some platinum today. I already own some. Those who think I'm wildly bullish should not construe that as evidence that I own a ton. Yeah. And one of the things I've been waiting for is a sign of a pulse. So I'm now playing technical analyst, and I'm not very good at that. Well, I don't do it at all, right? I mean, they're just squiggles to me. But I do not want to buy platinum at the 10th year of a 20-year flat market.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of, now I saw a couple plots today by a guy who someone tagged me, which is what Twitter's nice for, is when people draw your attention to things. That suggested, and I've been watching the 1,000, 1,100 mark. It really, to the most moronic technical analyst, to me, felt like a breakout point, because that's where it's been flat. It's been wiggling along. So it's channeling stocks.com and all. It kind of looks like maybe it has made a bit of a move above the channel. And
Well,
so,
it's up to 1,084 today, and is
right.
basically low 900s, like what, a month and a half ago. But
Right.
some people have been flagging a breakout. I bought a little bit of physical platinum late last week. The way I kind of look at it is, whatever gold's going to do, you're going to get, I think, gold basically having gravity effect on something like platinum, where I think the ratio right now of gold to platinum is basically at
huge
all-time highs.
Silver to the silver, the platinum to silver ratio has plummeted.
Yeah.
Holy moly, right? So silver to gold has plummeted, and platinum to silver has plummeted. So platinum's like totally getting shit on, right? It's totally bottom of the book. So it's not gone through a meme phase ever.
Yeah.
Right? There's been some factor or two moves, but there's been no mania. By your math, there's about $3 billion worth of above ground platinum.
Yeah, I'll have to pull out the numbers here if I can multitask. But the other thing I'll add is with platinum, I was looking at like cost to produce in some of these mines and what's going on in South Africa, right? I think that's a pretty interesting setup. And if you look at kind of what happens when like platinum really gets going, there's no reason it couldn't shoot up to like 1,500 an ounce, like pretty quick. And
or
I
even
think
5,000 in the modern market.
Yeah, I mean, who knows really? But
$3 billion, at these prices, Ray Dalio could buy it all.
Well, that's the other thing, that I don't know if you've seen the headlines about China starting to buy up platinum, where like we kind of saw what happens when China starts buying gold, and platinum's a smaller market and all these different things. I think the kind of golf ball through a garden hose type dynamic might play out there. And I think if we look back in say 2027, 2028, like the setup here for platinum looks a lot like uranium did to me, like when it was $20 a pound, and everyone's kind of looking at it as like, okay, why would I buy this piece of shit, or these miners, or whatever the way is that you express the view. But I think in a couple of years, my view is that we're starting to play catch up with gold, and I think gold's going higher. So
there's this optimum amount of pessimism. Sounds like a paradox already, doesn't it? Optimum amount of pessimism, like when gold was in the 200s. I was buying gold when it was priced at 270, but I was buying it in a fund that was something like 28% below NAV. So you can do the math. I was buying it for like 210 an ounce or something. And if you're the only guy in the world who thinks that's a smart move, you're never going to do it, and it's just too painful. What you need is a very small cadre of friends saying you're not crazy.
Yep.
And so I can tell you there are some very smart people that I know who have their eye on platinum, and some of them manage in the billions. Now, will they buy billions? No, probably not. But some famous ones, and I know, I'll name one because I think he said it in public. Peter Bookvar bought platinum for the first time last fall. And I have a friend I have dinner with once a year. I try to. It's going to be harder now because our paths aren't crossing. Einhorn, I'll give me the name. And he's been really good to me for 15 years. Very helpful. And he said, complimentary, said, you're the second smart guy I know to recommend platinum. I have to start paying attention. And that kind of word of mouth, it doesn't take many guys like that to all of a sudden say, oh, that's interesting. Now, my big concern, because as a amateur market historian, which I think is the only way to do it, is that when the selling starts, everything goes down. So I think buying right before you think there's going to be a big whoosh. I have a list of things I want to own, but that I kind of don't have the guts to buy now. And Jesse Felder one day said to me, he said, don't let bearishness cause you to miss a good opportunity. And meanwhile, I'm up like 3 miles above the water line trying to stay dry. And so I will let a good idea go by me trying to stay out of harm's way, especially at my age. I'm 70 now. And,
yeah. Well, I think it's the Peter
I want
Lynch
to fuck
quote.
up.
It's the Peter Lynch quote, right? I think where he says something about missed opportunities, like more people miss opportunities waiting for like corrections to come and all that stuff. Where I think the way I look at it is when you have kind of the big picture view that like bubbles create anti-bubbles. I think we're going through what some people call like a capital rotation event, and I kind of view it as, okay, if I want to be positioned for what I think is coming and I'm not taking what I view as valuation risk, like that kind of lends itself to looking at commodities and certain areas in particular. But I think with precious metals, like you kind of, I think, are going to see, like you saw the safe haven bid in gold when you had the tariff tantrum, or what was it, Liberation Day sell off. Basically, a couple months ago, Trump was liberating everyone's profits, but
branding shit.
I mean, you look at that and it's like, okay, when you see on Twitter, like right there, I think it was like April 8th, this was getting passed around where it's like gold hits 3,500 an ounce, and someone posts the like Reddit post of, okay, the only logical solution is to put my entire portfolio in gold, and this was at like 3,500 an ounce. And I'm like, okay, that's a top, at least for a little bit. But I think
so I've learned my own psychologically. I've learned I have to average in.
Yeah.
Every time I've ever said, got a hunch, buy a bunch, which is a Rick Rule term, it doesn't work because you immediately, you might do well, but if it turns against you, your spine will turn to jello fast.
Yeah.
And so I've got complete, iron fists on gold because my cost basis is so low. So it goes down 1,000. I'm still way up. I'm up something like 15x on my earliest purchases of gold. I mean, that's a pretty good run for buying something that has no revenue. And so I think we are going to get this shit kicked out of us soon. I've been saying this for so long. One of these days, people say, "Oh, you're a stop clock." I get shit. I read comment section. If you post this, I'll watch it because it's like watching a game film. And then I'll read the comments, which in themselves are getting weird because the bots get in there. So if I say something about Ukraine, all of a sudden Ukraine lovers start showing up and botting the shit out of me. Oh fuck, I lost my train of thought. Doesn't matter. Probably wasn't worth the shit.
Reading the comments.
Yeah, so I read the comments, but oh fuck, it's gone. Don't worry about it. That's the problem with being 70. Here's something I discovered this year. Last year I discovered that I was turning 70 and I'd get Social Security. And I hadn't even thought about it. And I go, I should probably look into it. I'm supposed to do something. It says, when you turn 70, collect it. There's no upside to waiting any longer, right? And I'm going, oh, okay. And then I go, oh, wait a minute, that's next year. And then I do some quick math. I go, holy shit. So I'm not a starving academic, but the word academic tells you I'm also not Ray Dalio. And so a $60,000 raise is pretty good for me. And then I found out that because my wife didn't do much, much working at all. She was being paid almost nothing in Social Security. And I signed her up for it at 62, I think is the youngest age. And that was an over-under bet. She has health problems. So I said, okay, this chick's going to die. I love her, but that was harsh calculation. And I discovered that because she by being my spouse gets a significant bump in her Social Security. So I get another, I don't know, 15 or 20,000 added to her. So I got like an $80,000 raise this year, and starting last month, which was, and everything fucks up so much that when the check actually showed up in my bank account, I said, oh, this is amazing. I got a call from this woman at Social Security who explained all this shit to me. I didn't even know about it. I blog on finance. I don't know how Social Security works. I do know it's a Ponzi scheme. I got that part down. But she calls me, and two things were really stunning. One is she was intelligent. You would expect to get someone either from a foreign country who's suffering the language barrier, or someone who's just a moron who therefore has to work for the federal government. And she was intelligent and helpful. She says, by the way, you inadvertently signed up a month later than you needed to. I'd like to bump that forward. No effect on you. You'll just get another check. I go, oh, great. And then she told me about my wife. And I go, oh, great. Then she called my wife that day and signed to get the money. It was seamless. And this is in a world where, I don't know if you've noticed, but nothing works. I go to McDonald's. I stand there at the kiosk. I went there this morning to get a McMuffin or something. And I'm at the kiosk and I'm going, I don't understand how to use this thing, right? There's a bunch of choices. I hit one. I go, that's not what I was trying to hit, right? And so I finally just walked from the kiosk and walked up to the front desk. And that's I'm a Luddite. I do not like technological complexity, and why McDonald's doesn't have a kiosk that's completely moron-proof is beyond me. I can buy anything at will at Amazon.
Yeah.
Right?
I think
just look at Amazon's website. It's phenomenal.
I think we'll maybe detour back to the other commodities later, but with what you're saying there on Social Security, I think that'd be an interesting thread to pull on, because the way I kind of look at it is they're not really serious about working on debt to GDP or deficits or any of this stuff if they don't start going after military spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, basically like the big programs like that. And like at a 30,000 foot view, it is an interesting kind of point in time where you basically on a mass like scale have the younger generations subsidizing older generations through these entitlement programs. And I look at it, it's like, okay, sign me up for an opt-out where I know I'm getting exactly $0 from any of these programs when I'm your age. But if I could opt out of paying these, paying into the Ponzi scheme, like you said, like that, I think most of my generation would jump at that chance. So like, do you think there's any chance that someone starts to take a sledgehammer to some of these entitlement programs, or you think it's basically still going to be the third rail for at least the next decade until some of the generational changes happen?
The one you could go at that you mentioned with respect to the populace would be military. I think the average person would love to pull military bases out of countries. I think most people are really tired of that. So the problem is you're up against the guys who shoot guns.
Yeah.
And so you're up against the guys who have humongous money that they can deploy immediately to bust your balls. But if we cut our military in half, that would be phenomenal. The entitlements are going to be tougher because those guys vote. And I don't know how you do it. Now that I'm collecting Social Security, I have the disease, right? It's like, don't cut it now. I do not want to see Social Security cut 2 months after I start. Right, that would suck. Right, that would just suck.
You got your first taste, and now you're hooked.
Boom. Yeah, they gave me the crack pipe and 3 doses of crack, and now they're taking away the crack. Right. The Social Security Ponzi scheme, which is a term which I've been using a lot lately, and I also refer to it as the demographic Ponzi scheme. So everyone talks about the collapsing demographic and how bad it is, and I go, well, I'm sorry, but let's take Japan, right? Japan has this big demographic problem. Well, if you're going to tell me that 50 million people in Tokyo is too Spartan a population, you're dreaming, right? That's a fuck ton of people in Japan, right? And I know they have a demographic problem, and we know that demographics drives markets and drives economies and stuff like that. But then you reach the end of your rope, and so Japan has very few natural resources. Am I correct about that in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean they have to import basically all their energy. So
that's right, and that's it. That's the whole ballgame. I don't even know how they've done it. Right? I don't even know how they've done it. I guess it's having a homogenous, highly educated population. But Japan is part way to solving their problem, right? They're suffering, they're laboring a bit, but they're going to start dying, and then the younger generation, and it's going to be smaller, and Tokyo's not going to be as crowded, and they won't demand as many resources, and so I don't see how that's. It's bad news short term, but it seems like great news long term. And so this, I think if you need new entrants, new population, like opening the southern border, to pay for the existing entrants, that's a classic Ponzi scheme and should be stopped. It should die. And therefore I'm kind of rooting for the demographic decline, although I'm not supporting Tony Fauci's assistance. That part, I'd rather skip that part.
Skip the global experiment, like science experiments, so stuff like that.
Well, I'm happy that hyper liberal women are choosing not to breed. That's a good start. I hope they're not choosing not to have sex. That would be unfortunate. Not for me, but for someone, for you. I have a grad student who hits the dating scene. He's a very rational kid, and he says it's completely dominated by liberal women. And I thought about it. I said, you know why that is? And he says, why? He says, because the conservative women, they get grabbed up and married. And the liberal women, it's like, oh, I'd bang her, but that's it. I mean, I don't need this in my ear, right?
Well, it's a quote that all women are feminists. It's just a matter of degree, and like you have some that are off the deep end that, like you're right, it's not something you'd put up with long term. No. That's for sure.
No, it would be miserable, and there is a biologically based division of labor, and men fix car, women fix men. And
hopefully dinner.
And hopefully dinner. That would be nice. Yeah, my wife hasn't made one in about 30 years, but that's a separate issue. So I'm the cook. But we're supposed to be, providers and defenders. We're supposed to be big burly bastards who somehow can fight and make sure that predators and bad people don't risk the family, right? That's a hunter-gatherer model right there. And yet, so the women have the tricky problem of getting some guy who looks like he came out of Game of Thrones, who at the same time won't beat them, right, and won't hurt them. And that's a knife edge that women have to walk, right? And so they've mastered it, right? They know how to contain us, right? They can turn a guy into putty pretty good if they're good at it, but part of that is not going wow in the guy's ear, because he'll beat him after a while, I mean, he'll just say, screw you, you're not worth it. So there's been another consequence of feminism, by the way, which might as well just blow my head off now. Gloria Steinem was CIA?
Yep.
Isn't that, you are fucked up. I guarantee you are.
I've been down all the same rabbit holes you have. So
I know you are like Marty Bentz's twin brother. But one thing's the price of feminism, and I support. One day I said to a woman, a famous author, actually, I said that supporting feminism. She said, I don't. I'm going, well, I was not looking for a fight on that point, but there was a price that was paid for feminism and women having their choice, which I still support. But the price is that when I was a kid, women didn't really, they had their choice, but they had to brawl, right? They really had to, they had to put on their dyke hat or something, right? And pretend to be, aberrant. they didn't really have the choices. So the number of female physicists was microscopic. And there were women who were smart enough to be physicists, although I think men do math better is probably biologically true. Join Larry Summers in the shitstorm. The bell curves are different. But it forced women into professions like teaching and nursing, which meant that we had great teachers and nurses. We had phenomenal teachers and nurses. So my teachers were smart as shit. And nowadays, the teachers are the ones that again, now I'm going to insult the teachers.
We're making the rounds. We got to offend
rounds, yeah.
We got to offend everyone a little bit here. So
it's just drive-by shooting right now. But now a lot of the teachers are you look at you watch the videos of the teachers with their fucked up colored hair and stuff and making videos about fucked up things and going, why don't you remind yourself that your job is to teach children how to do math and read and things like that. So the teachers, there's really good ones. My daughter-in-law is a teacher. I mean, put it that way, Cornell degree, whole thing. Very smart. But the bell curve is lopsided. It's an asymmetric bell curve now, and you got some double 500 SATers in there in bigger numbers than you probably want. So
yeah, I think it is interesting because the whole education system from top to bottom has turned into basically since I was little, you see some of the changes, but then it's gotten really ridiculous over the last 10 or 15 years. And one of the questions.
How old are you, Ben? How old are you?
29. So when I was going to college at UW, the amount of check my answer homework and basically.
Which dub is it?
Well, it's just University of Washington. So
okay.
Basically when you go and your homework for econ or finance or whatever it is like A, B, C, or D, you get a check and you get I think 2 or 3 chances on it. It was all stuff that I could have been doing in middle school, and it's basically just a question of convenience for the professors, where it's okay, I could have one big assignment or one big paper that I have to grade and it takes time, or I can just do weekly bullshit assignments. That's busy work, right? And I think at some point people are starting to wake up and realize that look, college is not worth $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year for this version of education. So I think we're going to see a lot of those changes start to happen fairly quickly here. But I think one of the other things, to go back to what you're saying about demographics and maybe incentivizing different decisions, I've heard people talking about if instead of okay, most women go through college in kind of late teens, early 20s, if there's a way to shift things around where they can still get an education, but you incentivize women to start having children younger, because if you look at some of the demographics of, okay, there's a lot of women that are 30, 35, 40 with no kids. A lot of that has to do with the path of going to college, getting on the career ladder, and working their way up versus, okay, maybe that's delayed 5 or 10 years, but you incentivize a different path where, okay, maybe you become a mother first and then you go back to getting an education. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that idea.
Well, you made the demographic argument, which I don't support. I'm not worried about the demographics shifting down, dropping a gear or two. Not that it won't cause trouble. It's just that it strikes me as one of those, sort of like if you weigh 350 pounds and you got to get down to 200, you're going to go through a period of not eating well.
Yeah.
Right. You're gonna be intermittent fasting and eating just steak. So it'll be an odd mix of problems. But college now costs too much money to go and study stupid stuff and to not study. I think it was University of Texas at Arlington. I've cited this so many times. Did online reading, and they could monitor. The algorithms were smart enough to monitor if someone was reading. And one of the things is, first of all, the web page has to be open. Second of all, it has to be moving, right? if they didn't monitor at that level, they're not getting good numbers, but I'm guessing they did. And they estimated that per semester a kid was averaging, and I don't know if this is per course or per entire reading for the semester, all courses, but doesn't matter, 162 minutes. And so what I would say is, if that's true, that university should not exist, right? That there's no purpose for that college, or whatever, maybe there is, but they're not doing online reading for those courses. But I think universities are anachronistic. This will get us into the land of Trump real fast. Universities are anachronistic. They needed a wake-up call. I actually gave a bunch of chairs a wake-up call. When I was chair, I was at a chairs meeting. The dean was saying, look, you can't teach a course that has less than 4 students. And they were whining, some of them. Generally, the chairs are pretty good, but some of them were whining. And the moment that really caught my attention was when some guy said in an academic voice, you must teach Dante in Italian. And I'm going, oh my God, someone dropped acid in my coffee. And that was fun. So I went on a rant. I said, look, there's over $1 trillion of student loans. The world is starting to hate us. If you don't wake up and recognize that there's a certain reality that we have to confront, the dean just sat there nice and quiet. I know she wanted to give me a hug. And I said, the system is going to change. I sat down to lunch with an economist who's an expert at academic economics. And he said the golden era of academia is over. This was probably in 2000. This was probably 10 years ago. And so we hadn't yet hit the fan, right? There wasn't a lot of evidence that it was over, but he was saying he thought it was over. So then the question is, what's going on now? Well, I think, you know how the fourth turning chatter's picked up? Mm-hmm. Smart guys are talking about 2 things now that they didn't used to. One is a 40-year recency bias, which has been my obsession. I would like to think some of them heard me say it and said he's right, and they're now saying it. But either that, or we've in parallel drawn the same conclusion. But the markets are fucked up because for 40 years they've had tailwinds that will not exist in the next 40 years, in my opinion. And when you're 200% over fair value, historical average value, and the tailwinds disappear, you're in trouble. You got 40 years coming. That's just arithmetic, in my opinion, that are going to suck. And so the other thing the smart guys are talking about is fourth turning logic. And so one of the guys who articulates it the best is Grant Williams. And he was with Adam Taggart, who's also very good. And they were talking about institutions being torn down during fourth turnings, and then during first turnings we'll rebuild new ones. But these big institutions, they start small during a first turning to fix fundamental problems that appeared and got destroyed the system in the previous fourth turning. So you start them, and then they grow and they evolve and they get better, and then they get old, and then they get skanky and necrotic, and then the fourth turning comes back 80 years later and they die, and they get torn down, they get burned to the ground. It's like a chicken coop with termites, right? You just put a match to it. And so they were talking about it. And at one point, so institutions from the previous 80 years disappear. And it could be, Adam Taggart mentioned NATO. That seems like an obvious one, right? You'd probably minimally take a 50-50 bet on NATO going to shit. The EU could go to shit, right?
I think it is 5 years or less on the EU.
Right. But there's other institutions, like one of them is potentially academia, right? It's possible that the post-war Sputnik era is going to get torn down. And I can't rule out the possibility. I've been watching Trump. Trump is attacking academics, and there are 2 categories. Now I'm going to piss off the Jews next. Some percentage of what Trump says looks like he's kowtowing to AIPAC. and I'm not anti-Semitic. I, however, believe that every government in the world lies to us. And you could even say every government has some dose of evil, varying degrees of evil, right? So to oppose a government, Israel, United States, you name it. I opposed the Biden administration. I didn't like Bush getting reelected after the Iraq War, is not against the people. It is against the government. And we should all be questioning the government at all times. So AIPAC is got too much power in this country. I think that we could make a case for supporting Israel. I think it could be based on military, economic, technological, or even morality, right? I'm not making the case. I'm just saying those are the categories that you make a case using. What I would like to know is that we're making the case to support Israel in our best interest. And if you can say, look, trust me, Dave, we're doing this for the United States, I'm fine. Whatever. Now, I do believe that we've reached a point where I can't make that case. I was talking to an intelligence guy from another country, and he says, you're trying to understand the world, yet you've got kind of a gag order on Israel, which is obviously it's falling down fast. But he says you cannot understand the world without understanding Israel. And this is a guy who actually wrote a thesis while living in Israel. And so he gave me Mearsheimer's and Waltz's book, The Israel Lobby, and said, you got to read that. And I read it. And Mearsheimer and Waltz have balls the size of cantaloupes. They just spent an entire book going bang, bang, bang on Israel. The Israel Lobby, and they just made an unbelievably scholarly case that says all these arguments that are being made are not right. And Mearsheimer's fearless. I mean, he takes on these big issues. Bottom line is that we should be able to criticize Israel. Now, the question I like to ask on this idea that every government lies gets us back to the rabbit hole story. And that is, I like to ask people, say, therefore, do you have any idea whatsoever what happened on October 7th? And the answer is no. I guarantee you don't know what happened on October 7th. I guarantee you I don't know what happened on October 7th. I guarantee you what Israel's telling us is in Israel's best interest. Yeah. So the propaganda machine's working, just like when Russia attacked Israel, Ukraine. The next day I went to class and I said, as some of you know, the world changed yesterday. And here's what I'll tell you. I said, there's going to be people in this classroom on both sides of that story. I said, whatever you do, be kind to each other. Right? That didn't work very well. Right? That really didn't work very well. And what I'd like to point out is that we're hearing over and over and over about anti-Semitism on campus. I think that's pretty much a load of crap. And what that is AIPAC flexing its muscles. Now, the problem is that explains why Trump would beat on Harvard and Cornell and places like that temporarily. But these are starting to look like pretty deep wounds. And again, academia, if we lost half of the colleges, we'd probably be better off. Because the anachronism of spending $300,000 to major in philosophy or sociology, that's a trust fund baby sort of thing. And that if you're paying hard cash that some parent ground their fingers to the bone to save for you, you should be learning how to make robots or go to med school or something, right? It should be a self-extinguishing debt. Yeah. Those will not extinguish the debt.
Well, go ahead.
I think college has got to change. I think it's priced itself out of the market.
Yeah.
And so Trump is beating on colleges for two reasons, best I can tell. One is it's part of his woke agenda, anti-woke agenda, which I love. The other is it looks like AIPAC was pressuring him, although now you can't tell what he's doing, right? Now he's, he's talking to the Arabs and leaving Netanyahu out. So heaven only knows how this man works. But here's the thing that makes no sense to me. But it could be that it's a like Sean Newman has this idea of like that we're looking at a two-dimensional puzzle. It's like an overhead with a picture on overhead, the old transparencies we used to call them. And that there's layers of those, and you get a picture by sort of looking through all the layers. And we don't know what layers we're looking through right now. So we don't know what Trump's up to. But what I can tell you is he shut down all the funding of the university research. He's pretty much shut it down. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know it's like a patient in the ER that's flatlining. And you've got a certain amount of time before you start doing damage. And you could say, well, why should Harvard or Cornell get any money from the Fed? And that's a legitimate debate to have, actually. You can fund research in other ways. What I will tell you is the United States had a globally dominantly successful research system. So it might have had its problems, but be careful. That's a Chesterton's fence problem. Be careful about tearing something down like that, because you might not know why it was built like that.
Yeah.
And so
well, I think the thing I'll add too, with just the talk about like Trump's seemingly scattershot approach, it seems like part of the goal with what he's been doing is trying to keep the media playing whack-a-mole, where it's like one thing one week and then next week it's on like going after universities and then Middle East, all these different things. But I think to kind of tie in the university side to what's going on in markets, there's been some interesting headlines that I've seen on the endowments for places like Harvard and private equity and some of these different things, where it's like, oh, like 60-70% of these endowments are in illiquid, like basically toxic sludge that no one knows, like that they're not marking them accurately, is basically the short version.
So there's two issues here. So there's really two issues. One is when you hear of a gazillion-dollar endowment, what fraction of that is actually real?
Yeah.
Right. And I bet you and I agree that the next crisis, as I said in a tweet yesterday, during the next crisis, the word private is going to be in every article written about the crisis. And it's either going to be about the private debt market that collapsed, or the private equity market, which was full of crap and which was bought by every pension fund in the world, trying to reach for yield while the Fed set rates at zero, right? And it's a catastrophe, because there's so many fees upon fees. And so the private equity guys are running like hedge funds, but making no money. They don't have to mark to market. I know I'm telling you something that you know well, but your listeners might benefit. So they're not marking to market. So they could have commercial real estate, office buildings on their books for worth 150 million, when in fact the windows are all smashed in and the refugees have just got kicked out, that sort of thing. So Harvard's endowment could be half of what they say. The second thing is that the endowment is siloed. My salary is paid for from Cornell's endowment. I'm the Betty R. Miller Professor of Chemistry, thanks to a donation. But that's all it can be used for, my salary. And David Einhorn at one point set up the Einhorn Center at Cornell for $50 million. But that's what the money can be used for. It's in the endowment, but it's highly cordoned off legally. The contracts were signed, and so the amount of actually real slush money, very low. The endowment, I looked this up. Endowments kick off. You look at the percentage of what endowment spinoff money pays for. 50% of it's financial aid. So 50% of it's to make the $300K a year less than $300K a year. Some other percentage has to do with just supporting academic programs. And then you get down to this, you realize there's kind of these little razor thin groups where there's actual control over it. We could dissolve the DEI offices and fire the 12 deans of DEI and things like that. And that's where Trump could save universities and companies a ton of money. by tearing down the infrastructures that require all this bureaucratic red tape and shit. And this is not to say we shouldn't be fair and bend over backwards to help underrepresented groups, but the DEI complex had become a toxic stew of crap.
Yeah, there's the way I'll put
I'm
it.
sure wondering today I've begun my campaign to get fired.
The way I'll put it, going through my experience through like University of Washington, is it's definitely noticeable the people that get selected for business school or different things versus I'm like, these people are idiots, and I know for certain that I'm smarter than these people, but if we're gonna put our thumb on the scale that much, there's gonna be a lot of people that are my age or maybe 5 years younger, 5 years older, whatever it may be. There's going to be, I think, a pretty interesting change coming as like my kind of generation gets into positions of power in business and education and some different things that they're like the people that came up with this whole like civil rights DEI like dumpster fire. They're going to look back on it and say, "Oh, we overdid it. That was a mistake." But
well, that was a boomer thing at some level. So yeah. The boomers are these, love children of the 60s. And this is why you have turnings, because generations respond to previous generations. So for example, my father's generation was pretty rigid. They came back from the war and said, we are going to be happy come hell or high water if I have to fuck you up. Right. And my generation is like, I'm still scarred by the fact that I had to clean my plate no matter what glop my mother put on it. And I just refused to make my kids eat peas if they gagged on peas, right? It just makes no sense to me. And
peas are disgusting though. So
peas, yeah, liver, if the kid doesn't want to eat this shit, don't make them eat it. There's no logic to that, right? I mean, it's not like they have to take a vitamin or something. And so we created out of a collective guilt, right? By the way, which president was the best president for civil rights, in your opinion?
I mean, I look at the whole thing as a disaster. I think eventually...
No, there's a president who was really good on civil rights.
Probably Trump, I guess, but I mean...
No, Eisenhower. You look at Eisenhower's administration, that's when they broke down the walls that really were between blacks and opportunity. That's when they integrated schools and said, look, you got to let blacks into your school. You can't do this. But Eisenhower really did it. And then, of course, the left picked it up and turned it into a gigantic government program.
Well, I think there's two sides to that story, too, of what was going on. There's some interesting books, the type of books that are like $500 or $1,000 on Amazon because you can't get them in print anymore.
Yeah.
As far as how the schools were integrated and what happened after. But I guess the other thing with education, before we kind of circle back to commodities, like I do wonder if we're going to get something that happens with the student loans, right? I'm not saying we're just gonna like write them all off and like ignore that people took out a shitload of debt for worthless degrees, but I think moving forward there are better ways to make sure the costs don't get out of hand, make sure people get degrees that are actually worth it, and have something that's tied to, okay, maybe the university's on the hook for any loans they want to give, or maybe there's a different funding structure, like royalties type setup for, okay, like if you want to have...
being discussed actively now?
Yeah, I mean, if you had a student and said, okay, you're going to pay $0, so you're not going to have a negative net worth right off the rip when you graduate, but we want 10% of your income for a certain amount of time or to a certain amount of dollars over the next 10 or 15 years, whatever it is, right? I think that's potentially a better way to structure it than basically having a shitload of debt, and it's the only form of debt that you can't like write off in bankruptcy, or like basically follows you around no matter what you do, right?
So in 2011-ish, might have been 12, but it was a long time ago, I think it was my first capital accounts interview with Lauren Lister, who I would have married right there on the set. She was dating Dimitri Kofinas. Yeah, I didn't know that. And I'm sitting in the green room, and two things were going on in the green room that I didn't know, but one I sensed and the other one I didn't. So I'm talking to Dimitri, and I said to him, "Are you banging her?" And he waved it off, but he was. The second thing that was going on is, have you ever read the article about Dimitri and his brain tumor?
I am kind of vaguely
Vaguely
familiar
familiar.
with the story, but
Yeah, so what I
haven't read
didn't
it.
know is Dimitri had a pretty bad brain tumor at that point, was sort of really struggling to hang on to reality at that point. He hid it from me. I didn't see it.
Hmm.
But he was already in the throes, and he was told it was inoperative, and he was inoperable, and he was going to die. And then some guy at Columbia said, "I can take that out. I can deal with that." And I think it was Columbia. And so in any event, I propose exactly that: some percentage of your annual salary for some number of years, and then so you loan money, like you loan $100 million to Cornell and say the free market dictates the rate. So you say, look, Cornell, we will charge this percentage of their income for this amount of time, and the free market could dictate the price of that bond. And like, for example, as I've said many times, a tranche of student debt by that rule at some place like Stanford or Caltech or Cornell would come. You could get student loan debt pretty cheap, right? And also, you get out, no matter what you earn, you pay a percentage of it. So if you're a barista because you studied sociology, at least you still have a mechanism to pay off the debt.
Yeah.
And what you're betting on, the bet is just like indexing the markets. You're betting there's an Amazon out there. You're betting that someone who borrowed money is going to really knock it out of the park, and that's where you're going to make your big bucks. Now, more recent epiphany. So I presented exactly that model and then wrote it up that year and stuff. More recently, I realized, why not let the endowments invest in their own student debt using that model? Let them bid. Let them put it on their own books.
Yeah. Well, I think you'd get a lot more responsible lending practices than we're going to loan you 60 or 70,000 a year for like art history or.
And here's what would happen. Here's the prediction. First of all, a bunch of schools will go out of business because there's a ton of schools that, what the number one ranked poorest bang for the buck is? Columbia Journalism School. That's a little painful. A lot of conservatories get pounded. You get you spend $300K to get a degree in music, unless you're Yo-Yo Ma, you're not going to pay that back. And especially at Oberlin, where they owe $40 million for the problems they had with the bakery there. So that'll be the first problem, and you say that's not a problem. It's a way of scrubbing out the degree, the programs that simply are a loss. They don't bring net benefit to society. It would cause schools to think very hard about what subject matter they offer. So my son went to a school that was very low academic standards, in my opinion, offered 4 majors, and were very good. And they took, the best I could tell, the requirement to get in was that dad could write a check. And they had forestry. It's called Paul Smith's. They had forestry, hotel management, some sort of culinary major, and something else. So it had kind of a vocational feel to it. And it was a 2-year program, and my son was a disaster in high school. And I'm thinking, well, okay, become some assistant manager, some microtel. It beats bagging groceries, right? And I tried to get him to join the Navy. I mean, it's pretty odd. We have more degrees in our family than you can count. I'm trying to get him to join the Navy. He is now phenomenally successful, but it took a while to climb Mount Stupid. And the school did a great job. I sat there in the school at some orientation thing I went to, and it was really funny. First of all, they sit up and they tell what their philosophies are. They say, if some kid's wearing purple hair, we're going to say, look, you're not going to get a job if you have purple hair. So let's get with the program here, right? And I'm going, oh, I like what I'm hearing. And they have a liquor-free campus, right? A dry campus. But I'm talking to my son, He's telling me what really goes on. He's at the orientation, but he's getting the lowdown from the students. I'm sitting with the parents waiting for the kids to be returned from some tour. And one woman said, well, you know, when that lady asked about, that person asked about drinking on campus, they seem to dodge the question. And I'm thinking, I thought it was a pretty rational answer, say, you know, boys will be boys sort of thing, right? One of those things. And we have a dry campus bought, you know. And she said, I thought it was wishy-washy. And I said, well, I was talking to my son, and he said every single kid on this campus is a pothead. So there's that. And the lady was like, what? So anyway, it served him well. It served him really well. And so that'll happen. Now, the second thing that'll happen is someone will say, oh, my God, look at those campuses that left. Those were serving minorities. That's racism. And so then all of a sudden we'll have to save these colleges. Now, we don't need gender studies at Cornell. The reason we don't need gender studies is because women don't need some place to go. And I don't think Cornell accepts women because they're women. I know I read admissions at Cornell chemistry. We haven't had to accept women to get to some sort of minimum acceptable number for decades. And part of it's because of Cornell. Cornell actually is very attractive to women. And so we'd have, 35% women back in 1980. That's a big number for them. And now, of course, it's zero problem. But if you bring some kid in from the hood and he has tremendous potential, boy, we've done some interesting studies in chemistry to show that this potential can be tapped. You can't just throw that kid in the deep end and destroy them. If you are going to accept a kid to Cornell, you somehow got to find a way not to make that a bad fucking idea, right? And therefore, we needed Africana studies because there were kids that were just going to fall through the cracks and get destroyed because when they first got here, they didn't have the tools. And you say, well, it's better if he's not here, than study, something that's not marketable. I go, I'm not sure. You kind of, you can't use Darwinian selection to achieve this goal that you seem to want to achieve. You have to understand what you're doing. And so Africana studies was a necessary major. It was a place where a kid could go to not fail.
Yeah, I was able to multitask here, and I think we're gonna go back to the commodities here. But before
Platinum.
I get into energy, I was able to find the slide that I was talking about as far as platinum deficits. So this is the last 3 years of, or I guess.
Can you send that to me, by the way?
Yeah, I'll send you a link. But basically, close to 1 million ounces in 24. Looks like gonna be pretty similar for 25.
Tell me about the above ground supply. That's the key one. That's the one that caught me by surprise.
I think it was, I don't know if it's in here, but this is one of my favorite guys to follow for.
Who is it?
Trader Ferg.
Why do I not know Trader Ferg?
He kind of enjoys the commodities, offshore energy, platinum, and some of these different things. I'll have to look. He had the inventory maybe in a different post, but basically you're seeing deficits like that are going to be, I think, my view is that 3 to 5 years we'll look back at kind of this lull period as similar to uranium for platinum. So I'll definitely make sure to send you a link after. But the one thing
according to Grok, 2,000 metric tons in 2016, which is times 32,000, 60,000, 20 million ounces is likely, includes platinum in jewelry and industrial applications. Okay. 2.5 million ounces in 2025.
Yeah. So
your model is bullish as a mother.
2 to 3 years. I think if you start getting to
you're out.
Inventory
you're
to
out.
like 1 million ounces, and then you're like, at these prices, you're gonna be like running it hot in like a year or two. It's like that doesn't just say platinum to 2,000. That's like we're really off to the races. So I mean, especially if China starts to step on the throttle there as far as their platinum buying. Like,
And they
I
would
think
even do it just to fuck us too, right?
I mean,
Potentially.
you look at what like you can talk about as a precious metal or industrial or half and half, but I think the headline was saying is like basically for jewelry demand, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, okay, gold's at 3,000 an ounce, platinum's at 1,000, but platinum is 30 times more scarce, and like I don't think that math is that difficult for platinum catching up. And I mean, you like the simple way I put it is there's a reason the platinum credit cards are like a higher tier than gold credit cards. So,
well, there is, but for example, diamond is a high tier nomenclature, and at the same time, it doesn't mean the diamond market has to hold up at all, right?
especially if they're making lab grown diamonds. So.
That are better than the ones that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Out of peanut butter sandwiches.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. I would have been off by a decimal point on that. Now, the interesting thing is I bought the platinum miners a couple years ago, not in big quantity. Like I said, I don't have a hunch, buy a bunch. And then I just watch, and they were dirt cheap. You know, cash in the balance sheet, low PEs. I actually picked up on them from a guy who did about 100-click YouTube. The guy went through the balance sheets and analyzed, and I said, no one's paying attention to this guy, but this is making sense. Well, they got cheaper. And SBSW, Sibanye, I got a call from the guy who said he was the largest private owner of Sibanye. And he wanted to meet up. I said, yeah, yeah, sure. Turns out he has a house within 10 miles of a cabin we have in the Adirondacks. So we spent a number of hours getting together. And he is pretty enthusiastic. And then Sibanye fucked some stuff up. They did what these miners often do. They cut deals to try to, hedge, and instead of just sucking it up and suffering for a little while longer, like Barrick Gold did years ago. And the miners have sucked, but they're having a good year. They're having a good year now, but they have not been a great investment.
Yeah, not yet. But if platinum goes where I think it is, and you can manage to avoid.
Well, they're also in South Africa, so they really could get hurt.
Yeah, that's the second part.
They could be disappeared completely. Yeah. You've seen the footage. I would not be shocked if there were no privately owned, publicly traded platinum miners in South Africa in a year. I wouldn't be shocked if a week from now they didn't exist. Right? It's that volatile.
Yeah. Well, I think that's makes the case for owning the physical even more compelling. Where it's like
exactly.
You don't have to worry about jurisdictional and all these different things, right. But at the same time,
jurisdictional shit plays favorably.
Yeah, and at the same time, if you have that like threat to supply in the next year or 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, it's like, okay, if South Africa or Rhodesia, Zimbabwe comes offline, then you're like basically taking off a huge chunk of PGM supply. So,
right,
I think it is interesting because it's one of those things that really flies under the radar, and even the people that are like the chart guys flagging it is like, oh, it's just the early innings, might be a breakout, maybe not. But I'm like, look, if all these miners, if the low cost producers are producing, I think the number I got was like their cost of production is like $1,200 an ounce. It's like, okay, if I buy the physical here, like, am I really going to get blown out over the next 3 to 5 years? I don't think so. So
yeah, I think the downside of platinum is potentially, I mean, it's got a floor at 1,000 too, right?
Yeah,
it's
pretty
got
much
a ceiling and a floor. It looks like, I was wondering if maybe it wasn't geopolitically getting pegged. I mean, it really has been a pancake.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens.
As authentic as the Japanese bond market was until 2 months ago.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons that I think commodities are so interesting, where I think rates are going higher. It's either that or yield curve control kind of for the U.S. and right. for some of these different countries. And when I look at energy in particular, I'm like still stubbornly bullish. I know that's an unpopular view. Even the guys that like.
No, I'm wildly bullish. I just worry that they're going to get cheaper before they get.
Well, that has happened in the offshore drillers. It's happened in a lot of things. And you look at it though, and what I kind of look at as far as the oil price from here, if you're cutting capex in the Permian, if you're seeing production numbers do like
You
basically
think the
give you a
Permian's rolling over? Do you think the Permian's rolling over?
So
not just rolling over because they're not fracking, but rolling over because it's actually the supply is actually is rolling over.
So here's the way I'll put it. The short answer is yes, but there's a caveat there where, like, I was talking to a friend. He's a private investigator who is like basically driven that area of Texas like several times, and he says it's basically just a field of all these like rigs, drilling equipment. Like he basically said, look, there's not a spot that they haven't tapped, and so you hear guys like Scott Sheffield saying, "Oh, we're going to be out of tier 1 inventory by 28 and tier 2 by 2032." You have some of the things they're saying. I remember, just as an anecdote, there was a guy on Twitter who had basically said, "Yep, the guy
name."
It was a non-account, but I think it was like Teddy Gambino. But like follows oil and is follows energy services and stuff like that. Like pretty entertaining account. And he said he basically gave a story of working with an oil worker who in 2010.
I'm connected with Trader Ferg on Twitter, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, he's kind of inactive on Twitter from what I can tell, but definitely worth a follow on Substack. But what I was saying is he was telling a story of an oil field guy who in like 2010 basically it said that's the smartest CEO, and when he sells, like give it 2 years and the Permian's rolling over. And he sold Pioneer in 2023 to Exxon, and so that's like an interesting anecdote. But the way I kind of look at it is, drill baby drill is not going to happen at 60 or 65 a barrel. You're going to see more capex cuts the longer we stay down here,
unless there's some sort of government subsidy.
I mean, good luck getting that through. The subsidy is going to come in the form of higher oil prices. But the way I put it is, like, I don't know if it's the Gehring and Rosenzweig kind of thesis that even if we get 80 or 90 or $100 a barrel, that the Permian still won't be able to increase production. Where, like, I'm uncertain where it's like, okay, if we're 85, 90, could the Permian still increase production? Like, maybe. Like, I really don't know.
Well, I talked for about 2 hours on the phone the other night with Chris Martenson. And again, Chris is really smart. Does he know everything? Is he factually correct on everything? Probably not. But I've known him for 20 plus years, 25 years almost. And he pays attention to this shit really carefully. And he thinks the Permian's rolling over. He thinks the whole, fossil fuel story is really, the peak oil has made fools of a lot of people a lot of times, but at some point the spherical globe will show that there is a finite resource. Now, here's the question I like to ask: is why are guys like Doomberg so optimistic?
Well, I think the way I'd put it is, like, I'm not sure we're ever going to run out of oil. I think there are some pretty compelling arguments for abiotic oil. And
it's still hard to get.
But that's what I was about to follow up with is, I don't think we're ever going to run out of oil. I think the oil that's out there that we can pop a straw in the ground and like tap easily, I think that stuff is already been found.
The Jed Clampett oil.
Yeah, I mean, like the way I'll put it is, like, people say it's peak cheap oil or whatever. It's like, I just don't think there's that much oil out there that can be profitably drilled at like 60, 65 a barrel. And if it is, like, it's for the most part already been found, or you need to be exploring in places like Africa, off the coast, in some of these deep water areas where it's like, okay, this thing could produce in 5 or 10 years at these break evens, but it also takes tens of billions of dollars to go from day one to actual production. So
there's at least a medium term bullish case.
Well, I mean, my view is that we oil prices are going way higher by the end of the decade because, I mean, variety of reasons, but basically,
So how do you play it?
I mean, my only meaningful position right now is Sable Offshore, which is the California oil company that
You told me that last time.
I've
Sable
been
Offshore. How do you
pounding the
spell
table on
Sable?
it. Yeah, the ticker is SOC, but basically, in every way, it's the exact opposite of the Permian. And I've been really pounding the table on it for the last couple of weeks. They have another court hearing today, actually, as we're recording, that I'll be listening to shortly after we stop recording.
Are
But
they cash flow positive yet?
they are just firing up production. So basically, the whole question around it was, this thing is a pre-revenue company. They have a trophy asset. No one knows for certain if they'll get it into first, get it producing and bring it online. But they started production was it May 15th, a couple weeks ago.
When did you go into it? When did you first go into it?
I was buying shares at like $24. And then had been buying calls for basically all of 2025 for June and July, when shares were at
Someone
18
made
or
a
19.
fortune getting into this one in 2023.
Yeah, a lot of the guys who were in it from the SPAC merger,
Right.
and some of these things, you still look at it though, it's still absurdly cheap, because it's basically what I think is going to happen is it's going to be the closest thing to Saudi economics in the U.S. once they ramp production. And
Where is this? Where's this field that they're tapping?
it's off the coast of California, and that's what has people worried, is the jurisdiction.
Oh,
Yep.
My God. The greasy porn star might stop it.
Well, that's the funny thing, is Newsom's actually been pretty supportive behind closed doors. It's the California Coastal Commission that's been trying to take a
he can be
dump.
bought. One thing we know about Newsom is he's got a price tag tattooed on his ass.
Yeah, he's definitely a snake. But if you look at what he's been saying about the refineries, and if he wants to make a real run in 2028 for the presidency, he can't really have gas prices at $7-8 a gallon while the rest of the country is half that price, and run on the campaign slogan of "Make America California." So,
Make America California. Oh God, that's great. Oh God, yeah.
But I mean, you kind of look at it, and the lifting costs of what I think their lifting costs are going to go below $10 a barrel once they ramp, because they have these 3 fixed platforms in place.
Has this oil been known about for a long time?
It was a producing field for Exxon until 2015, when
what happened. Why did Exxon dump it?
There was an onshore pipeline spill run by Plains All American, and so it's been shut in for basically a decade. But in that time, the field is repressurized, and Exxon was trying to get it up and running for 5, 6.
Did they spin it off as Sable?
They basically, so the whole transaction, the way it happened was, Sable CEO Jim Flores went to Exxon and said, "Why don't you loan me $625 million to buy this thing from you, and we'll put it in a SPAC, and basically we'll try and fire it up. But if I can't get production restarted, you can take the asset back," because that's who would be on the hook for the thing anyway if Sable wasn't able to restart. And so basically they had to jump through the legal hoops to repair the pipelines and make sure there's check valves, and put on basically do everything that was in the consent decree to check all the boxes. And so they just put out an 8K this morning saying the pipelines have all been hydro tested. It's ready for full operations. But the last piece is fire marshal signing off. And what I think is going to happen in the court hearing today is basically they don't have a real case. They can't really go to the judge and say, yeah, we got a tentative injunction and we're going to stop this project at the goal line, because they're not even on the consent decree. They county's already said all the repairs are authorized by existing permits. And you kind of look at it and say, okay, if this thing is going to produce 60 to 100,000 barrels a day, depending on how fast they ramp in the next 12 to 18 months, and they're going to do it at lifting costs below $10 a barrel. They own all the infrastructure from pulling it out of the ground to sending it off to the refineries. and they also get Brent pricing, so $3 to $5 above WTI. And they basically said right from the start, hey, when capital returns start, we're going to pay a $4 annual dividend, and then we're just going to buy the stock in. So, right, for a stock that's $32 today, that's still pretty interesting. And I was lucky enough to get on the JP Morgan call.
So if the court clears it, how long before the oil flows?
Well, they're already producing right now. They're filling up the processing facility, which is before the pipeline that needs to be
they'll
cleared by the fire marshal.
They'll throw a switch and it starts that day.
They'll surge oil once the fire marshal signs off and once the processing facility is full to a certain point. But basically, they said the timeline for the next 3 to 4 months is once the fire marshal signs off, we're going to surge oil probably late June, early July, somewhere in there, which means first sales of oil somewhere around that time, and then first revenue coming in August. But I mean, it's just like a massive resource, like low decline rates, all these different things I think are really interesting. It's basically the exact opposite of the Permian, like extremely, extremely low variable cost production, where like once you spread all the fixed costs over, like if you look at their guidance they put out when they announced, or even just their investor slides from May, they basically said 80% fixed cost. I think it was 75 to 85. And if you take that guidance for 40 to 50,000 barrels, which I think they're still being conservative, and spread that over 80,000 barrels or 100,000 barrels, which I think they're probably going to, then you get some truly mind-blowing numbers as far as margins and like free cash flow, what they could do with capital returns. And like the way the stock's priced right now, if they're sitting on like 1.5 billion barrels of reserves recoverable, like they've been saying, you're still buying like Saudi economics for like $3 a barrel on the ground. So as
I look at the stats on this company, this is one of these companies that I would never spot myself.
Well, it screens like dog shit because there's no revenue still, right?
Right.
And
no, it absolutely screams like dog shit. But I take you seriously.
yeah.
Okay, so let's get past what is your Viagra investment, and ask you in a more general sense. Let's say no one listened to this podcast. What would the smart people be doing?
I think a lot of people are interested
Service industry, drillers, royalty trusts. How would you do it?
Yeah, I think the smartest people I talk to are pretty interested in the offshore drillers. The onshore services companies, like I look at them and I think they probably can still get squeezed from here as far as like the supply and demand picture for those, the onshore guys isn't as clear to me, I guess, as the offshore drillers. And some of those companies like Valaris, Noble, like if you're partial to ones that pay dividends, like Noble's got a pretty chunky yield on it. And you can kind of go and look at some of the big boys in that sector, but it's basically an oligopoly, and you're probably going to see more consolidation there.
Right.
I think the people that are basically fine with Canadian risk and they want the long-lived assets, they would rather take their chances with Canada over California. I think some of the oil sands names are pretty interesting. There's a lot of cheap valuations, a lot of buybacks, but then
I own the Canadian oil sands through a chunk of the 2000 to 2000, we'll call it 15.
Yeah.
Run. I got so lucky that decade because I bought energy as an inflation hedge. And so after I was equity free throughout 2000 to 2003. So that was my greatest blind nut finding a squirrel moment, and was owning gold. So that was good. And then I started worrying about inflation, which has always been here and always underestimated, but never got headline the way I expected
2021.
it to.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But I bought a bunch of energy equities. averaged in aggressively throughout the knots and did really well. And
Yeah.
but that wasn't me understanding really what was happening. That was just me thinking I was hedging inflation. My super bearish scenario, besides the fact that for the last 40 years valuations have compounded 4% a year, which is by definition not sustainable. In fact, they're going to compound negative 4% a year for some number of years from now on, I think, maybe 40 years. En route to cheap, and fuck, god damn it, I'm working on about 5 hours sleep a night. I'm done. I've said my piece. Let me ask you this. Buffett bought a ton of Oxy and is now underwater, and Jesse Felder highlighted that you rarely get to buy it below the price Buffett bought something. What do you think of something like that? What do you?
I mean,
it looks pretty generic to me. I've been staring at it, trying to figure out why Buffett liked it. I've not gotten the narrative that I liked.
The problem that I see for a lot of the Permian guys is, like, where does that leave you in 5 years, or
right,
however long your time horizon is with some of their inventory, with something like Exxon, like the super majors, where it's not just all their operations are in the Permian. It's like, okay, they've got Guyana and they've got other assets. They're going to be just fine from here. I know some guys like the infrastructure plays and the LNG plays. I just look at something like Diamondback or Oxy, and like if oil prices go here in the next 12 to 18 months, like, you're gonna do more than fine owning something like Occidental. But like, you look at some of the acquisitions they made in the last year, a couple of years, like, I think they probably overpaid. And
Oxy doesn't look cheap to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I guess it could get real cheap if oil doubles.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is I think they've got a fair bit of debt relative to some of the other competitors, and I think there's a lot of torque there whenever oil does start to move. So my uncle, this is one of my favorite stories, that I should have followed him on this trade, but he owned what he called a degenerate amount of the Oxy warrants in 2020. When the stock was $9 and the warrant strike price was like 22 or 23, somewhere in there. And so he just made a killing on those. And I was like, didn't really fully understand some of the energy thesis at that point. But the way I kind of look at the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're kind of laying the foundation for the next leg in oil. And it could take 6 months to really get going. But I think when you see, OPEC is bringing back paper barrels or real production, whatever you want to call it, but there's no more spare capacity that they're supposedly holding back. Then you've got the Permian doing what I think it will at 60 or 65 a barrel, and you're going to see similar trends from a lot of other places. That, I mean, 60 or 65 just doesn't cut it. So, I'm not saying we're going to be flying by year end, but I'll take the over on 70 by the end of 25 for.
Yeah, that doesn't seem crazy to me, especially because the companies need it. When they need it, they usually get it.
Well, I mean, they'll either do something about it, which is cutting CapEx, or it's just like, all right, we'll hunker down here for 3 months or 6 months. But I think CapEx, was it down 8% based on some of the Q1 announcements?
So what about something like the services? If the CapEx has been down, don't the services look good to you?
It's definitely investing countercyclically. I think there are some in there that have pretty hairy balance sheets. I think a smart guy who I was talking to, was it a couple months ago? He likes, was it precision drilling of some of the onshore guys? I think they've got a decent mix of American and Canadian exposure. Neighbors is the one that has the balance sheet torque, where if this thing goes, Neighbors is gonna absolutely fly. But there's that that balance sheet has a lot of debt. So like buyer beware on that one. And then there's some other smaller names in there. I can't remember. I think he was also talking about, was it Ensign Energy Services? I think what is it? C&Q CEO, who's like really smart. Everyone kind of looks at him as like the guy in Canadian energy. I think he owns like 25% of Ensign's stock. So I could be wrong on that as far as exact numbers, but he owns a big chunk. So like I look at some of those names, but then I basically have bet the farm on Sable because I think it's just one of those things where you don't see something like it come along very often, and it's been complicated up to this point, and I think it's getting simpler from here. But I think if you're looking at energy broadly, I think there's a lot of places that when oil starts to recover, and I think it does in the next 6 to 18 months, I think there's a lot of opportunities in the sector. So
what happens to the nuclear world if oil recovers?
I think uranium probably goes higher too. I think if you kind of look at those, oil and uranium, from what I've been hearing, are pretty correlated, especially when you get like a real bull cycle. But I look at some of the equities like uranium miners, and it's just like I don't really feel that compelled to own Cameco. And some of the smaller miners is just like complete dumpster fire.
A dumpster fire meaning dangerous because you don't understand them, or bad investments?
Well, a little bit of both, basically. But you look at something like NextGen, which has been talked about as they're sitting on the next great deposit up in Canada, and like their management team is spending to advertise at hockey games and like diluting shareholders. And it's
Enron
like
Stadium effect, right?
Well, I mean, it's just like one of those things where it's like they might be sitting on a tier one asset that eventually gets snapped up by Cameco, but if they're going to dilute you along the way, and it takes
how
till
about
2030 to bring
tapping
online.
into the brains of guys who are way more knowledgeable than probably you and I combined? Someone like Gehring and Rosenzweig.
Yeah, I've looked at owning some of the ETFs. The way I've kind of looked at it is I want to be exposed
Do they have
to.
more than one ETF?
I think it was just the one, but I've looked at other commodity ETFs.
GRHIX.
Yeah, so
It's having a decent year. You got to be bullish on nukes, I think.
I think so too. I think you're going to see, big picture in the U.S., you're going to see a lot of nuclear coming online. I think I can't remember where I heard this, but I think have streamlined the permitting process for any development on federal land, where they can go around whatever the nuclear regulatory agency name is that's escaping my mind right now. Anyway, I can't remember what it's called, but it sounds like those could be coming online faster than people think. And I kind of look at it as like, if I'm bullish on uranium, I think you can still buy the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust for a discount to NAV. I'm not sure how wide it is right now.
What's that, URA you said? URA?
There's different versions in the U.S. versus like the Toronto Exchange one.
I think it's URA in the U.S. Yeah. There is one. Put it that way. I don't know if that's the Sprott one or not.
No, I think that was a miners ETF. I think it's for the U.S. traded, it's SRUUF is the U.S. listed physical. So I don't know if it's at a huge discount to NAV right now, but that you're obviously just betting on the price of the commodity versus betting on miners and execution risk and all that stuff. But I think that looks interesting. But
the URA is a bunch of the like Oklo and NextGen and
yeah.
But
I mean, big picture, the way I kind of look at it is like I want exposure to oil, shipping, coal.
Do you worry about shipping getting hurt by deglobalization, which seems to be a real move?
I mean, some of these commodities and what some of these shippers do, I
I
don't
mean,
think is
oil. So
going anywhere.
specifically the energy shippers.
I like. I'm not a huge fan of LNG just because of what's been happening as far as the order books there. Like, there's been a huge like on for containers and LNG specifically. There's been a lot of the order book focused on that side of shipping. I'm pretty bullish on tankers and dry bulk. So the tankers or the ships that carry coal and iron ore and basically
How about coal? How about just
bulk
coal?
commodities. I think from what I've been hearing from guys like Matt Warder that follow it very closely, like this year is probably going to be the trough. 2025, like I think there's maybe another puke lower in some of the equities in the back half of this year. There's a couple names that I like really want to buy. I'd love to buy them lower, but I'm kind of more partial to U.S. names than ones that are in Australia, and I'm kind of leaning
In
towards.
Australia is so Australia has this fucked up situation where they shut down all their power plants that use coal as the world's largest producer of coal, supposedly. And now
Yeah.
their grid has collapsed.
Yeah, and they're also doing unrealized capital gains or something. I was hearing about that recently.
Oh yeah, we should go back to private equity again. I think we didn't finish that one.
Yeah,
private equity and private debt. We should go back to the privates.
Yeah,
cover your privates.
I guess
cover the privates more thoroughly. How's that?
Yeah, I guess the 30-second wrap up on coal is what I'll say is the Australian royalty regime is like a little bit of a minefield, and I'm more partial to the met coal producers in the U.S. versus the ones that produce thermal coal. So that's kind of the big picture view. I think there's maybe another buying opportunity later this year. They're still already very, very cheap. So if you think it's a cyclical commodity, if you look at what happens in past bull markets, the coal stocks typically do very, very well. So as far as private equity, private credit, I think my big picture view is it's a whole bunch of toxic sludge. And the funny thing I've been seeing lately is instead of letting investors like take their money out, they basically said, if you want to get your money out, you have to reinvest in the next fund or like do a continuation. So they're basically doing the extend and pretend bullshit from like stuff you've seen there. And it's like, there's so much garbage. Like there's loans against NAV. There's all this other stuff. Where I'm
the risk of investing in anything right now is that the system is so necrotic in terms of the criminality underneath the surface that what you're going to discover is that money managers you thought were honest were crooks. You're going to discover that asset classes you thought were sound are paper bullshit. You're right. Ponzi schemes are gonna pop up. You're gonna get your Enrons and your what's that global something global MF global. You're gonna get global crossings. You're gonna get all these different things showing up. The bodies will be showing up in barrels in Lake Mead as the water evaporates. And that's the great risk. And I think this particular bubble, which I do believe is a bubble, but someone pointed out that I'd said this. It was actually kind of clever. I called it a caldera. It's so big that you can't see it except from satellite imagery because it's this gigantic bubble, this sitting over Yellowstone National Park. And when it goes, I think what you're going to find that the risk was so widely distributed that it didn't protect you, but rather it just hid it, right? It was a thick veneer of risk that at any one point didn't look that problematic, but it's just everywhere.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's in bond markets, like
even my
rates.
Hunter Biden paintings will go down in price,
That's a shocker.
But I'm still hoarding eggs in my freezer. Yeah, so that's what worries me. So I'm a bit of a worrywart, which makes me very defensive.
Yeah.
But again, when I look at valuations, I go, there's whatever you get from here, you are going to get back.
Yeah.
When you're with these valuations, you might get some more before you get back. But this is like a plane at 35,000 feet with smoke coming out of all the engines. You're 35,000 feet away from the ground. Take it to 45,000 feet if you want, but as they say in the manual, you will have enough gas to get to the crash site. And I think it's going to be an uninvestable market for potentially decades once it really starts. Very Nikkei-like, maybe, is my best. Although it won't be, it's never the carbon copy.
Yeah.
If you ever hear me say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. If you ever hear me say that, I want you to send me a letter bomb and blow me up because trite metaphors I don't like. Got to come up with new, fresh ones.
I'll pull out the Ted Kaczynski playbook.
Exactly. A friend of mine was on Ted's list to bomb.
Really interesting. Mm-hmm. The one pushback that I'll maybe give on like broad equities is kind of the capital flows argument of, okay, like money's not going to go into Europe for any sustained period of time. I can see an argument for money continuing to flow into the US. And I'm not arguing the valuation side at all. I think there's no reason to own Apple or Nvidia or like some of these companies at these valuations, but I wouldn't be surprised if money continues to pile into the U.S. just because it's kind of.
Which means we'll be going to 45,000 feet.
Exactly, but I get your point. I'm just saying, like, there's, I was talking to Paolo Macro, who writes a good Substack, probably in January, and he thinks, like, he was saying, look, like, 2025 is probably going to be the year of Max Stupid, where we see all this different shit, like, hit the fan, but then you're going to see like the run it hot playbook out of the government or all these different things. You're going to see cryptos go ballistic. You're going to see all these, just wild things happen. And like, we're not even halfway through the year and he's been proven right on that so far.
Well, I think the markets have been what I call cryptified, and I'm not trying to insult the Bitcoin guys. The Bitcoin guys are in the same boat as the gold guys, where the price is dictated purely by sentiment. There's no benchmark. Gold, maybe crypto, I understand less, but gold at some point the price you could say is dictated by the cost to get it out of the ground. But there's so much above ground that you're not going to run out of what you already have. So
yeah.
So the price is what it is, and there's nothing to tie it to. Whereas an equity has revenue streams and earnings and dividends and things like that, and has historical benchmarks. And we have cryptified the equities. We've watched so many people get fantastically wealthy by buying things that go up. That only the old farts and those who've read history understand that at some point you always will return to the revenue stream model for equities. You're always going to get back to that. It's never it's only about the price crowd is going to be right for a long time, but not forever.
Yeah.
And it's already been a long time. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
And interesting. I did an analysis this last year where I talked about this, and so that this is debatable. Mike Green contested this, but I didn't quite understand his logic, so I don't quite know what to do with it. But Horizon Kinetics did an analysis of the triple Qs and said, look, if you look at how they calculate the market, the PE of the triple Qs, which if you're buying the triple Qs, you look it up, it says, oh, it's got a PE of 30, which means you're basically purchasing an investment that's promising to return you 3%.
Yeah, if there's no growth, yeah.
And if there's no growth, you say, yeah, but there's growth. I go, okay, fine. There's growth. How much? I don't know. But Horizon said the way they do it is they have some pretty funky rounding errors. Like if it's over 40, they round it down, and if it doesn't have earnings, they call it 40. And so it's actually got an upper limit of 40. Now, he said if you combine them all and you simply treat it as a gigantic Berkshire Hathaway, it's got a PE closer to 90, and probably now it's over 100 since they last did it, which was about 4 years ago. That same year, Halbert did the same thing for the Russell 2000 and came up with about the same PE problem, where it goes from being, something that you can plug your nose and say, okay, it's priced to return a modest sum, but they're growth companies. And you go, no, it's priced to return 1%. Now, an index price to return 1%, if you say, okay, it's growing like a demon, okay, so it doubles its earnings. It's now priced to return 2%. Okay, it doubles its earnings, so it's now priced to return 4%.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
How many earnings?
You have to double earnings a long time to make that.
And this is the
pencil.
math I did on eBay during the .com bubble, which is the only .com I considered buying, which I didn't. Because I did the math on if it grew earnings 20% a year, how many years would it take to become a rationally valued stock? And it was just too many years. So I said no.
Yeah.
The case I like the best, the example I like the best is Coca-Cola, because Buffett, of course, that's his Viagra stock of his life. He loves Coke, and he sits there and drinks a Coke to show off and shit. Mm-hmm. But he in around 2004 or 5, somewhere, I can't remember when, he lamented hanging on to his Coca-Cola stock. And people don't remember this, right? They just remember Buffett just saying, "Oh, I buy American and I love Coke."
It got up to like 60 times earnings or something, right?
It got up to 50 times earnings in 98.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Now, so Buffett is smart enough to do the math and say, okay, Coke's returning 2% cash flow, right? And at that point, it turns out that the treasuries were returning around 6.5%, which means he could buy treasuries at 2.5% or Coke at 2%. And you say, well, yeah, okay, but Coke could grow. And I go, how can Coke grow? They were selling every fucking bottle of beverage to every person in the known universe, right?
Yeah. They
could grow by acquisition of smart water, which someone said very cleverly, if you're paying $3 for smart water, it's not working. And so Coke really was a royalty trust where you pump fluids out of somewhere and sell them to people. And to truly double your earnings organically was impossible to imagine, right? You had to somehow, you had to cannibalize someone, you had to acquire it, which cost money. And so it really was a royalty trust, which meant that, but let's pretend like they could double their earnings organically, then it would return 4%. So you still haven't even caught a treasury. So Buffett realized that he boned it, and he lamented that.
Yeah.
Briefly and quietly. And then Coca-Cola beat his ass senseless for a couple of decades. Yeah. Because he owned it at the wrong price. Now, stocks like NVIDIA, so Microsoft, let's start with Microsoft. Microsoft increased on like tenfold and grew its revenues 150%. You go, there's something wrong with this picture. What I don't remember was back 10 years ago, was Microsoft a screaming buy, or had it just become kind of a commoditized company?
Well, I think it did get 10 times earnings and like 3% dividend.
Right, but that was about the right price for a big fucking company that just sells a commodity, which is software. Now they did some stuff to increase their revenues 150%, which is pretty good. But tenfold
margins got better, buybacks,
right?
All the other stuff.
Right, but tenfold, right? So then you go to Apple, and Apple's revenues were something like 50%, going up tenfold.
Yeah,
and so there's and then NVIDIA grew its revenues 25-fold, and you go, whoa, there's a story. Well, it went up 250%. So at some point, you got to give back those factors of 10 and factors of 5 and factors of 6, just to get back to just a normal value. I don't remember the market screaming at us how dirt cheap it was in 2015.
Yeah.
In fact, I found a podcast that Grant Williams and I did together in 2013, and he was wailing about how insane the markets were.
Yeah.
And they just got nuttier, right? They weren't cheap. They were okay. They were better. But so now I think we're the private equity, private debt market, right? That's where the if you buy a Lazy Boy recliner and you want to pay for it in 4 installments, that's what you do. And
you can do Chipotle burritos in installments now.
Yeah,
You
you
can
can do DoorDash and installments, which means the consumer's at the end of their rope, right? And
or there's some people that aren't very intelligent that are
that's
deciding
kind of,
that
and the end of their intellectual rope.
Yeah.
There's a joke about a guy, Ollie the lumberjack, comes into the doctor, and he's got a shard of wood sticking out of his arm, and the doctor, oh God damn it! I says, oh, I felt worse. And he says, what's worse than? He said, well, one of the worst things I felt was I squatted down over a bear trap and it clamped me right in the balls. And the doc said, oh, that must have been unbelievable. He said, well, the worst thing was when I got to the end of the chain. and to me, often the end of the chain has become a metaphor.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to the end of that chain. And at some point, the markets are going to be cheap. And if we're 200% over historical average valuation, we go below the historical average. God have mercy on our souls.
Yeah, right? I think it'll be interesting to watch. There's still, in my view, like stuff out there that's cheap, but it's not going to be owning index funds or.
But when the markets had a PE of 6, half the companies were below 6.
Yeah.
Right. So PE of 10 looks like it can save you right up until it becomes a PE of 5.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, though, there's stuff where I look at it, it's like kind of have to pull the trigger on.
Well, that's the Barry model. Michael Barry says whatever you invest in, you should be willing to just hang on to it if it goes down.
Yeah. I think we didn't even really get down the rabbit hole. So I'll have to have you back on to talk about some of the stuff going on with Epstein and Diddy and all this other stuff you've been diving into over the last kind of 6 months.
That's the friendly stuff. I've been diving into human trafficking and satanic cults and everything else under the sun.
Yeah.
David Berkowitz.
Name it. Most people
Macron's father.
most people don't understand how sick and twisted some of this stuff is, but I think it's fascinating to talk about with people that have looked into it a little bit, and I think that'd be a good detour in a future podcast. But we didn't even really hit on that or get too deep into real estate or some of these other things I think would be interesting. So we'll have to have
real estate's a big problem too.
Yeah. We'll have to have a return appearance, but I do have to ask my traditional closing question again, which is what book should I add to my reading list? It can be history, finance, investments.
Well, big picture audiobooks.
Yeah.
It's dead time. You're in the car. You go to the store. Your wife asks you to go to the store. She's asking you to read for 10 minutes. She asks you to go pick something up. You're reading, right? So I have an audiobook in my car at all times. I can mow through a lot of books in a year just doing audio. I encourage people to read more about things like neuropsychology, history, the foundations of authoritarianism is a very important topic. A book that I found phenomenal was the True Believer, which was recommended to me by a guy. He said, "Oh, you got to read the True Believer." Written in 1953. It's about mass movements and how they form and who are the true believers and why they go the way they go. So all the Matthias Desmet, things like that. Psychology of totalitarianism. So I think it's possible that that the digital world was guaranteed to usher in authoritarianism. That's my big fear. That's my big dark picture is that when the digital world became real, authoritarianism was in our future no matter what.
Yeah,
and we got to protect against that best we can.
I think we're definitely on a pretty interesting path for the next 5 or 10 years at least. But if my listeners want to find you on social media or find your year in review, where can they look to find you?
Well, I'm at David B. Collum, Collum on Twitter. I write an annual review, how to not market a blog, publish one a year, right? Without any advertising. I have no sponsors. Bob Moriarty is binding the last dozen or so, and it will be an anthology, and the whole thing will sell. They're coming out individually, but you can probably the number of people buy the whole thing I'll be able to count without taking my sneakers off. But it's just for posterity. It's for me. I mean, I'm helping them. I mean, I'm working hard at it because I have a bookshelf which has some of the years that are done. It's kind of entertaining. My year in review is located as my pinned tweet at Twitter, and I was told it's gotten some reads by some pretty important people, so it is reaching places. I'm supposedly going to do a Tucker Carlson interview, and supposedly he read it. Larry Summers read it. David Stockman. He actually said I was the best economist at Cornell. That's funny.
I'm sure that pisses off your colleagues in
no, they don't even know
school.
me. They don't even know me. And so I'm sort of a 500,000 hits supposedly, which means that maybe 475,000 looked and said, "Oh shit, I'm not reading this. It's too long."
Well, I read it every year, so I think it's a must read. There's lots of different topics in there, but
weird shit too. I mean, I try to tell the story beneath it. It's a Michael Lewis type approach. I try to tell the story behind the story.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more kind of wide ranging than just a typical here's what happened in markets this year.
Just gold. Or here's gold.
Here's the history, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I'm going to write at least 100 pages on trafficking this year. It's been 3 years in the making. I'm gonna bang out the trafficking story. I think is so global, and it's got Satan. It's got everything in it. It's got everything to make a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to read. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to chat with me this morning. And I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.